Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar, How Automation Can Take Contact Centers to the Next Level. I'm Gail Kozakowski and I'll be moderating today's session with Najeeb and Chris. Before I turn it over to them, I'd like to tell you that the session is being recorded and you're in listen-only mode. So please submit any questions in the Q&A in the lower edge of the screen. And with that, I will turn it over to Najeeb to introduce himself.
Thank you so much, Gail. My name is Najeeb Saour, and I lead the technology and automation practice at Burnie Group. We're really focused on helping our clients solve their most pressing operational challenges. My main focus is on helping our clients find the right platform, the right product for the right purpose from a technology perspective to address a need, whether that's enhancing an experience, reducing a cost, or just making things more simple. I've got a passion for automation and a deep knowledge of artificial intelligence, and I'm really excited to be here today to talk about artificial intelligence automation in the contact center.
And I'm Chris Lamberton. I'm the Chief Exec of TrustPortal. TrustPortal is a hyperautomation platform that works primarily in the contact center. And I'm here to help describe how hyperautomation is actually impacting real customers today, the kinds of things you can achieve. My background is I've worked in the RPA space, the automation space, for nearly 11 years now, which is very old in RPA terms. My background is from consulting, so I used to work with EY and Deloitte, assisting very large clients globally to transform. So I've been CEO for TrustPortal for the last 4 years and very happy to be here.
Great. Thank you both. So with that, let's launch into our very first question, which is, what does hyperautomation mean to you? And then how can it help contact centers?
If I give a sense of so hyperautomation as a term was originally coined by Gartner. And what Gartner basically defined it is the rapid discovery and automation of as many processes as possible in an organization using a combination of technologies. What we think that means is ability to basically change the way that people work in the front office in its widest sense, and effectively really transform the experience of staff and customers on top of the existing environments that are already there. The reality is, I mean, the vast majority of the customers that we work with, which are very large enterprises, kind of Fortune 500 type organizations, they have, on average, anywhere between 10 to 15 systems that an agent has to work with in the contact center. So if you imagine that complexity means a huge amount of training, huge amount of opportunity for error, a huge amount of issues with, trying to navigate around 10 to 15 different systems to give very large call durations, average handling time very large, and effectively really frustrating customers, basically. So what hyperautomation is about is accepting the fact that you're not going to change the fact there are 10 to 15 systems that you have to interact with, but changing the way that the agent experiences working with those systems through this hyperautomation technology and being able to make it so much easier for the agent to do their job. But we then try and think about this in the context of the customer as well, because customers don't always want to call in. Customers may want to use chat, they may want to use web self-service, mobile apps, whatever is applicable and available to them and their preference. So to us, hyperautomation has to also think about, well, how do we make sure that a customer has a fantastic experience, whether they're talking to an agent or whether they're working through any channel that they want to work with. And so the real context of hyperautomation is how we transform the way that customers experience an organization, how staff present the organization without having to think of changing all the underlying systems that an organization has. Najeeb?
I couldn't have said it better myself. I think you hit the nail on the head. It's really an amalgamation of capabilities that act as hard and soft tissue on top of your existing tools and things. A lot of organizations have a very complex legacy infrastructure, and the ability to change those quickly is typically quite difficult and challenging and costly. So what hyperautomation does is it helps augment, enhance, or complement what the work of frontline staff do and sort of take the mundane and the routine out of it while giving them a stronger experience.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we think is very important is hyperautomation is not a technology that's around, ripping up what you already have. What we've seen in the last few years is a move from helping agents in a contact center to effectively a multi-channel approach. So more and more people understand they have to provide services across newer digital channels, be that chatbots, chat, web, mobile, whatever it might be. And there's a lot of investments that have already been made in those technologies. Pretty much every company has a public-facing website. Pretty much every company has experimented with things like chatbots. And so hyperautomation has to be the layer that sits on top of what you've got, the investments that you've already made and the systems you already have, yet still manages to transform the experience, transform the average handling time, the efficiency, the effectiveness of your staff, in order that they can really, really produce valuable services back to your client base. And indeed for the clients to do this themselves through self-service as well. So, and it has to be, in our context, we think if you're going to do hyperautomation, you have to do it across all channels. Clients no longer want to be forced to ring into a contact center. What they want to have is, if the contact center is down, and let's say, as in, maybe it's closed at 8 p.m., I still want to be able to engage with the company through self-service or chat or whatever it might be. So the ability to have a way of engaging your customer base across all the channels and augmenting the investments and the systems you already have, that's really the context of hyperautomation.
All right, good. Well, thank you. So the next question is, tell us about a time where you've seen hyperautomation drive value in a contact center setting. And then, why should organizations consider it in parallel with their other technology investments?
That's a great question, Gail. We've done some work with a few clients, but one of note is a large regional telecommunications company where they employed a solution that enabled the contact center agents to act more fluidly between, conversations with a end user or a customer, and interacting with those 10 to 15 systems to make the experience less cumbersome. So we were able to reduce call handle times by 50 to 60%. And more importantly, first call resolution went up. In addition to that, and Chris alluded to this before, it's almost protecting the frontline staff from the complexity of the ecosystem and the tools and the training. So what they were able to do was, training times went lower, employee satisfaction went lower. We'd go live with things and get amazing responses from frontline users, almost requesting more things to be automated. So the impact of it is quite high for task-based automation when you're sort of moving away from that swivel chair activity to sort of look up data, move data between systems, understand whether they're eligible for a campaign or things like that. Anything that's sort of mundane and rules-based, you can interact with either a user-triggered event. So say, for example, a contact center agent needs to look up data that is specific to a certain ask. They can click a button to trigger some automation to retrieve that data for them instead of doing it themselves. But in addition, for some of the lower hanging fruit, you could auto trigger things from an IVR. So an IVR can come in, you've got the policy information, you've got the customer information. Hyperautomation can connect to the backend systems so that the sort of holy grail of customer engagement is having a 360 view of who your customer is. So getting there is very difficult, particularly with disparate systems. But what hyperautomation can do is interact with all of those disparate systems and provide a console to the agent so that they're not searching for all of the tombstone data to know who's actually on the other line. So for that reason, I don't see hyperautomation as being an and or to core transformation within a contact center, whether that's your IVR with Genesis, whether that's, dovetails into sales and CRM with things like Salesforce. We truly see it as a complement and a requirement to be that connective tissue between engagement, system, data, and the end-to-end journey. So a lot of times contact centers and some of our clients are in the midst of larger transformations, and they're sort of grounded in requirements, 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, 2 years to actually get to value, whereas hyperautomation can get to value much quicker and be a complement to that transformation to get benefits in year where that makes sense as a stopgap, or actually be part of the end state as that connective tissue I was articulating before. I don't know, Chris, anything to add from you?
Yeah, I mean, certainly on the last point you made, I mean, most clients that we work with have a very fluid systems environment. So, they're constantly in a state of, if I go back to those 10 to 15 systems an agent has to deal with, they're constantly in change. So those agents have to constantly be retrained on the new systems. Everything is always in a state of flux. But the nice thing about hyperautomation is the ability to abstract from that complexity and present very, very simple processes to the agents or to the customers through self-service to enable them to make it as slick a process as possible. And that's why it's all about, to us, about augmentation. So how we are augmenting what the investments you've already made. So as Najeeb says, maybe you've got a Genesis IVR or a VIA or whatever it might be. You've got you put in Salesforce or ServiceNow or whatever. You're not going to rip those out, but you still have these 10 different systems that maybe those tools can't connect to. So hyperautomation is about making that, as Najeeb says, this connective tissue that creates a new environment for your agents and for your customers to massively improve their productivity. So when Najeeb is saying 50, 60% out of a telco, that is very real aspiration for hyperautomation. Most of our clients are on average reducing their average handling time by about 50%, which is enormous. And the impact in that on both fiscal, but also on your staff is huge. So if you're making it so much easier for your staff to do their job, then training is that much easier. So a large telco we used to work with had a 3-month training program until people were proficient. That's now down to weeks. Attrition goes down because, actually customers are generally happier. That there's a very wonderful virtuous circle. So when your average handling time goes down 50% and your accuracy goes up because the process is that much easier, then your customers are that much happier. So you actually get, lower cost, happier staff, happier customers, higher net promoter scores. So hyperautomation is really about, to get that holy grail of that virtuous circle of everybody being happy, while still not talking about ripping everything out. It's augmenting what you already have, basically.
Yeah, and I'd say the tools within hyperautomation, which really what we're referring to, and Chris mentioned a few, are chat. There are things around robotics process automation, which can handle the sort of rules-based augmentation, but the connectivity of systems over the last few years has just gotten that much better. So you can have machines talking to machines through APIs and other services a lot better and a lot faster with some of the more modern architectures now, while you still have the RPA angle to handle some legacy systems. So there are architectures you can put in place that now are available to do things a lot quicker than potentially 4 to 5 years ago, where you might be waiting a long time for a response. So as organizations continue to modernize their back office and try to build the APIs and the connectivity, the element of hyperautomation, particularly with the RPA side, it just gives them another tool to connect when other connection mechanisms are not available or too costly to implement.
Yeah, I mean, we're lucky in that we have a set of technologies now that allow us to basically interact with everything. That's the great thing is hyperautomation, because of its use of RPA and other tools, it allows you to know that you're going to be able to connect to any system you need to connect to. So if you think it in its wider sense, where hyperautomation leads you is I can create new processes, new digital ways of working, new automations on top of every system I have. And then I can expose it either in the contact center, but also through to our customers directly, to your partners, through whichever channel that they particularly want to engage with. So it's that ability to kind of, as Najeeb says, the kind of digital glue, the connective tissue, however you want it to do, to say it, and now enabling you to do things you really couldn't do before. You're creating entirely new 2B ways of working. I mean, some of our clients have literally created actually new products and services, because effectively we can now in real time stitch together multiple different systems to create a new view of the world. So one large telco we work with created a what they called an offer configurator, which is a packaging of 4 different, so a broadband, mobile, fixed line, and TV packages, and effectively create one, offer for a combined view, which actually was 4 different systems all being accessed and kind of brought together in real time to create this entirely new way, new offering. So hyperautomation is about enabling entirely new ways of doing something and new products and services to your agents and to your customers.
Okay, let's talk now about how automation is different within the contact center. So what are some of the key nuances to executing automation within a contact center?
Well, I suppose the first one is trying not to throw anything out. I mean, most of my clients have been Fortune 500 through my last 20 odd years. So some of the clients are, for example, one very large US insurer has 50 different claim systems. You're not going to get rid of 50 claim systems anytime soon. So it's got to be in the reality of what you already have and how you can then create new opportunities on top of those. And indeed, those are going to be changing. So effectively in the contact center, it's about understanding where the biggest bang for the buck is relatively quickly. For us, we like to see that you can actually get, tangible business benefit measured in low numbers of months. And that's because hyperautomation allows you to sit on top of the environments you already have, connecting into the channels that you already have, and being able to change those processes, change the ways of working, change the way that the agent is supported by this technology, very, very quickly. So to give an example, we have a client that had a UK utilities company. They got trained, it took about a week to train them, and they themselves then created processes that were live within weeks, basically. So hyperautomation is about making it real very quickly to your agents, building belief, building a kind of a momentum around, well, actually, we can achieve things that were previously too difficult, too costly, not enough time and capability that could be invested by IT to basically do things at a much faster pace. So we start generally, our advice is to start relatively speedy. So don't try and bite off huge big processes, but start on something that's very tangible, has a very tangible effect, has a very tangible business value, and then effectively try and make it repeatable and repeatable and repeatable. It's all about being able to deliver business value very, very quickly. These hyperautomation platforms should be what we call no code, so they shouldn't be building, they shouldn't be developing, new coding. It should be, reusing the capabilities, no code capabilities to do things in weeks, not months, basically.
Yeah, that's all great points, Chris. I think for me, the nuance with the contact center is really the stakes are high. You've got a customer on the other end that's looking for data and looking for accurate responses quickly. If you just look at a tool set like robotics process automation, a lot of the back office stuff is typically batched. There's room for error. There's some room for error, some room for optimization because the turnaround time isn't necessarily as quick. There are obviously some tighter SLA processes, but what makes hyperautomation different in the contact center is there is a customer on the other line. There's a customer on that website right now looking for data. So the nuances around how you manage that digital workforce requires a little bit more rigor than some potential automation COEs would be putting in their batch processing processes in terms of monitoring their effectiveness, making sure that there's enough capacity for the data to hit the planned volume, having capacity to come in and out based on marketing campaigns or times of months that are busier for purchases. So the ability to scale your workforce is another large benefit of contact center automation specifically, because instead of having to bring in 20, 30 more staff to handle calls, because you're reducing that call handle time, you're just adding more infrastructure to the existing tool base as an architecture to just round out the entire workforce, whether digital or human, to tackle the issue or the challenge or the need of the day.
All right, let's move on to our last question, which is, what does the future hold for automation in the contact center setting?
I wish I had a crystal ball. And this is a really fun question. I mean, there's been so many advances in the last 2 to 3 years with not just back-end connectivity like we discussed before, front-end connectivity as Chris articulated, with the ability to go omni-channel within suites of tools. But we wouldn't be able to talk about the future without talking about things like generative AI and sort of chat enhancing the experience. We've seen the chat GPTs of the world that are able to provide some context or some interesting responsiveness back. But currently that tool set, at least with that application, is based on data sets that are public or sort of outside of the corporation. But I envision a world where that power is put onto internal corporate data so that a client can inquire about a policy, or whether they're involved, or whether they can apply for a certain offer, or whatever have you. Is the power of that generative thought process applied to corporate data will enable a very similar type of experience, but from a corporate setting. Then you obviously get into ethics, AI, how accurate it is. And I think that part of our business and that part of our governance structure is still being defined internationally. But for me, that's a big piece. Other tools that are sort of shaping this are coming together, text-to-speech advancements. If people still want to call in, there could be a chat engine in the background feeding a more wholesome, more fulsome, less robot-sounding agent, really, to have that conversation in real language, as opposed to what you would experience in most IVRs or more rudimentary AIs that are in market now. Another piece for me is really a lot of companies in the consumer space are all about hyper-personalization. The data around a person that is publicly available through social media, other channels, is just so much more rich. And a lot of corporations are getting this data by having you sign in through your Google, through your Facebook, through your Instagram, whatever that have you. So that data will enable corporations to personalize experiences based on the type of user that is, whether it's a persona based on age or a persona based on interests in a certain area. So that level of tailoring and hyper-personalization, I think, is a ways down the line, but I'd expect that to happen. And last but not least is, and I mentioned this before, is the scalability of just these capabilities. You won't have to necessarily bring in a lot more staff to handle the peaks because of the advances in cloud computing utility models. You'll be able to deploy these tools to scale up and down as you need them. That's from me, but Chris, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
I think they're all very good points, Najeeb. I think I kind of look at it in a slightly different way. What won't change is really these technologies are all about helping people, and they're either about helping staff directly or helping customers themselves. And effectively, I do think there's got to be the right balance between human support to customers and technology support. So I think what we will see, I think, from our point of view, is more and more augmenting people to do their job better, as well as being able to hand off in a simpler way between different technologies, keeping context, making sure that there's a very simple journey for a customer that may have come in through chat or maybe on the website and then came onto chat, actually isn't quite getting what they're wanting, then want to go to talk to people. So the ability to really have a fantastic journey across all those dimensions, I think, is important. So to me, I think what will happen is becoming more and more augmenting across all of those channels. So while I see things like generative AI being absolutely transformational, at the end of the day, it's only as good as the ability for it to access data, to be able to kind of respond and actually do the requests that you want. And if it can't, to make it really, really seamless for somebody else, for a human to assist and make that really very straightforward. So I think we're not going to get away from people helping people anytime soon. But I do think that these technologies, certainly the large language models, the AI tools are going to be really transformational. But I do think that it's got to be in the context of being able to actually still deliver on services. And I think that's where hyperautomation is, I think, going to continue over the next, well, I say a minimum of 5 to 10 years, in order to kind of connect the old to the new, basically. But yeah, I think there's going to be a hell of a lot of interesting things happening in the next few years, put it that way.
All right, well, with that, let's move into our Q&A. Nice timing. We have some time to take some questions. If anybody wants to enter a question into the chat, we'll give a moment to see. And while we're waiting, is there anything else, Chris or Najeeb, that you'd like to add?
I think that, I mean, coming back to the very first question, I think, hyperautomation, while it sounds very grand and complex, it really is, becoming easier and easier to apply into an organization. So the ability to, start small and scale is really very straightforward. You can get going in weeks. You can get a, very tangible business benefit in weeks and months at a, low impact to your business, doesn't have to change an awful lot, and can be, really augmenting what you already have very, very quickly. So while it sounds like a very grand term, I do think it's quite a, low impact in terms of being able to get value very quickly, put it that way.
All right, so we actually do not have any questions. Everything must have been extremely clear. Oh, there we go. There's one that just popped in. Does hyperautomation interact quickly enough to assist frontline employees while they're on a call?
What a great question, Chris. I think this is core to what TrustPortal does, so I'll let you take this one.
Yes, so absolutely. So to give you a very good example, one of our largest clients is a very large telco. They actually create a customer 360 with up to 400 data points across 10 to 12 different systems. And they're doing this for every single call, and they have up to 250,000 calls a day. So absolutely, the technology exists to transform every call. Now that customer 360 is actually being created in about 15 to 20 seconds. So actually what's happening in that particular environment is they are doing that through the IVR. So the IVR is determining who the customer is, what they're calling in about. The customer 360 is being created in the time that they're in the queue until they get to the agent. So by the time the call gets to the agent, the customer 360 has already been created. So they have a huge amount of information specific both to that customer and to their need in order to answer that question. And then we have, obviously engagement and interaction with that customer with the hyperautomation platform assisting them through every single step. In that particular customer, they have about, I think, 80 or 90 different processes that an agent can do in the contact center. And it's all being supported by hyperautomation to achieve that average of 50% AHT reduction. So absolutely, it can work at very, very fast speeds to transform the AHT within contact centers.
And I think a key thing there is the way that the data is being obtained for the use case that Chris articulated, which is, customer 360 based on a client calling in, is if APIs are available, that's absolutely the preferred option. Let's call it, let's get the data back. But anyone who's been in technology knows that APIs aren't always available, and sometimes the functionality of what you can do with an API may not be fulsome. So in instances where something like an RPA or screen scraping comes in, you can do that, and those typically do rely on some of the response times of the system themselves. They do take a bit longer, but that's sort of built into the journey of the wait time of the client on the IVR as they're sort of punching it in so that it's not awkward on the call. Last but not least is you can also connect these things to data lakes and other things like that. So as you build out your integration and reporting architecture, there's ways to make it seamless, ways to make it quick as you align your sort of broader data strategy on where the information is coming from. So it really depends on where you are, where you're going, and what tools you have available for these automation tools to actually extract data from. But the power is there to be flexible. And it's almost a case to try and open things up a little bit so that you can have access to faster data, more real-time data, and things like that.
All right, we've had a couple more questions come in. So next one is, what technology solution are you using to enable this hyperautomation? And then how does it integrate with the telephony solution, CRM, and then other systems?
Chris, I'm giving this one to you too.
Obviously, the one I talked about was our particular hyperautomation platform, TrustPortal. So I think the kind of the way to think about the kind of architecture of what hyperautomation looks like is we use a combination of digital workers. So that could be RPA type technologies, so kind of Blue Prisms, UiPaths, AA, that kind of thing. We have our own technologies for accessing APIs as well. And effectively, then we're orchestrating those digital workers to assist any particular agent. And the power of hyperautomation is orchestrating those digital workers. So you can actually have 5 digital workers all working on an individual agent's request. And then as soon as they finish with that agent's request, they move on to the next agent's request and the next agent's request. So you're kind of sweating the digital workers to make it very, very efficient workforce. And effectively, then being able to plumb the kind of the hyperautomation layer into any channel. So our particular tool has been integrated into multiple different IVR systems, public-facing websites, chatbots, CRM systems, you name it. So hyperautomation as a technology is the kind of, to me, it's the missing link to be able to try and really deliver the value on the infrastructure and the investments you've already made, basically.
Yeah, and honestly, the amount of market activity in terms of the industry for core software and vendors is dizzying. Every year it changes, consolidations, mergers, new products, new acquisitions. So there's a lot of players in this space, and we can sort of talk at length at who the players are, but it's really the capabilities of how it connects to automation tools, whether it's a chat or an RPA, UiPath, Blue Prism, whatever have you, to your back office. It's that truly that tissue, that connective ecosystem that's going to unlock the value of having multiple tools and getting the most out of your investments. So we have clients that have disparate shops that are 20 RPA bots in UiPath and 100 in Blue Prism. They don't want to necessarily rip them out, but like some tools can interact with these bots through back end. So one of the major changes in the last probably 3 to 5 years is the ability to trigger an RPA bot through a button. So you don't have to go through the queuing mechanism necessarily directly through Blue Prism or the control room for UiPath. You can set up these triggers within your source systems to basically call a bot through an API and it returns something. So that connectivity between it is also being made a bit more seamless. So the amount of tools and options out there are quite a lot. I'd encourage folks to focus on capabilities that are needed as opposed to tools, and the tools will sort of follow suit.
All right, we just have time, I think, for one more question, which is hyperautomation just in the voice channel?
No.
If I give an example, the very large telco we were talking about before, they've automated pretty much every process that goes into their contact center using hyperautomation. They've now realized that same technology can be used in public-facing web. So effectively, if you think about it, you're creating a new digital environment for an agent. Well, with a very little amount of change, you can change that digital environment to be the same digital environment, but set up for a customer. So absolutely, self-service is now a huge channel for hyperautomation. Similarly, chat and chatbot is becoming ever increasing, and as Najeeb says, with the advent of things like ChatGPT and ever more intelligent chatbots, the ability to make those intelligent chatbots actually connect to real systems and make them really do things. Hyperautomation is truly multi-channel, not just voice.
All right, well, with that, I'd like to thank you, Chris and Najeeb, for your time today. That brings this webinar to an end, and I hope everyone has a fantastic day.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks very much. Cheers.
Bye.